Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We are really excited to be here talking about cellular agriculture. And I'm joined by some really impressive panelists, so I'll give them the floor to introduce themselves in a moment. Really quickly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Mia. I'm the program director with Big Idea Ventures. We are a pre-seed to Series A fund investing in the alternative protein ecosystem through our new protein fund. And we're doing that with the goal of addressing a few critical issues that are happening with the current food supply chain, namely environmental impacts. And we're here to discuss a really exciting and important subsection of that, which is cell-based meat and other cell-based food products. So with that said, I will hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. We have our fourth panelist just joined, so happy to see him here. So first up, we have Liz Specht. She is the Vice President of Science and Technology at the Good Food Institute. Liz, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mia. Great to be speaking with you all. If you're not familiar, the Good Food Institute is a nonprofit organization founded about 5 years ago with the purpose of accelerating the rate of progress across the entire alternative protein sector. So we work on building up the innovation ecosystem through science and technology, working with established players from entrepreneurs through to incumbent industry folks, and also ensuring that there is a clear regulatory path and clear labeling standards, et cetera, for the industry. And I've been with the Good Food Institute for about 5 years now, so since pretty close to their founding. I'll hand over to Laura.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Laura, CEO of Innocent Meat, and we are based in Germany. And our mission is to create an automated cell-based production system for traditional food producers so they can change to cell-based meat in a very easy way. And I hand over to Nieves.
Hi there, my name is Nieves, and I'm the CEO of Noble Farms. And we are focused on producing whole cuts of gourmet cell-based meats, and we aim to bring culinary excellence into the cellular agriculture industry.
Thanks, Nieves, and thanks everyone for being here. Our fourth panelist, Carson Bone, he is the CEO of Blueridge Bantam. He is currently experiencing some technical difficulties, unfortunately, but we hope to get him up here shortly. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and move into questions. I'm seeing that Liz is having a connection issue as well, so I'm going to start off with a founder question for you, Nieves and Laura, and that is kind of, maybe a bit personal, but what inspired you to move into cell-based space or into the cell-based space and to found a company working on that technology?
Yeah, well, my background is I have strong background in agriculture, and since early we experience every day the climate change. So for me, this is the strongest driver. But also, I have to admit, I have a meat business, and we have several issues there too. So for me, it's clearly a new way or alternative way to produce meat, and it's for me a logical consequence to go on.
For me, it was mainly when I saw cellular agriculture, and I saw one of the biggest challenges was to create structured products. And as a molecular biologist and scientist, my co-founder and I were very attracted to, tackle that problem. And mainly because we think that, consumers in the future will want to have structure as well as unstructured products. So by producing these products, we will kind of entice meat lovers to the industry.
Thanks, Nieves. And Carson, happy to see that you were able to join. I'll give you a second to introduce yourself and also speak to the question, which is, why did you want to found a company in the cell-based space?
Sure. Like Mia said, my name is Carson Bone. I am co-founder CEO of Blueridge Bantam. We are focused on cell-based poultry products. Initially started with meat. Now we're more interested in fat. We are in Durham, North Carolina. Probably the main reason why I personally got interested is from the environmental and energy aspect of it. biological engineer by trade. I spent a lot of my career in renewable energies, and I saw this intriguing field kind of blossoming. Probably, I started seeing things come across in 2017, and from a agriculture biological background, it seemed like a really cool place to turn food upside down on its head, and hopefully do it in a way where we could reduce environmental impacts in energy.
Thanks, everyone. It's always great to hear, there's some overlap in different people's reasoning for approaching this space, but also some unique perspectives. So really appreciate your viewpoints. I'm going to move into our next question. And Liz, I'm going to have you start with this because I think you have a really broad perspective working with the Good Food Institute. Obviously, there's a lot going on in this space right now. There are a lot of new developments. What do you see from your perspective as some of the key differentiating pieces that will really help this industry commercialize?
Yeah, I think what I've been really gratified to see over the last few years as this industry starts to mature is companies really leaning into specializing and solving some of these deep technological challenges. There's sort of four main buckets of technology areas that we think are key for this field to come together. So cell line development, cell culture media optimization, scaffolding development, especially as we're moving increasingly towards being able to replicate sophisticated whole cut types of products, and then overall bioprocess design and bioengineering. And I think, in the early days of this industry, we saw some of the first companies essentially, proposing to do it all because there weren't a lot of partners that they could go to with solutions in these areas. Now we're starting to see more specialized companies who are really leaning into, say, the cell line development or bioprocess design, who can then collaborate and make swifter progress through these types of partnerships across the industry, as well as increasing involvement from industry leaders across, the life sciences and even the specialty chemicals industry, who are now seeing opportunities in this field, and they can bring their enormous R&D teams to bear on solving some of these challenges. So it's been a really encouraging sort of maturation of the field, to recognize that no one company will be able to solve all of these challenges without that collaborative mindset.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really interesting point. And you actually mentioned a few things that I know the CEOs with us can speak to as far as their own work. One thing you spoke about was collaboration. And Laura, I know that you have some interesting things happening in that area. Do you want to talk a bit about the way you're leveraging some existing and upcoming technologies?
Yeah, for example, we want to do like growth factors in crops, and using plants as expression system has been done, so it's feasible. But since we are like a small team, we want to advance the development. We partner up with university, like with our university based in Rostock, but also from the engineering parts, we're not focusing on hardware. We have because there's a lot of hardware out there. So we partner up with a bioreactor company, but also with a company that has like a cell media filtration system. So we don't think we have to invent everything, but still we have a focus point on biology and software.
Thanks, Laura. And another thing that Liz mentioned is the structure component. Nieves, from working with you, I know that's definitely in your wheelhouse, kind of a specialty. Do you want to speak about the importance that brings and some of the work that you're doing there?
Yes, definitely. So as I said, we started developing this technology, scaffolding technology, that is low cost and very versatile, meaning that we can customize it with a very low cost. And that's a very important functionality of the scaffolds, because to replicate the connective tissue of animals, there are so many factors that we really need to introduce. So we are focused on developing, perfecting this scaffold, and also starting to design the bioreactor that is going to go, that's going to be customized to create structured products. Whereas, for instance, cell line development and growth factors is something that we're going to outsource. And it's very, very nice that we started last year and we're entering when there are already like so many companies doing cell media, and then people are reaching, lower cost of the media. So that allows us to really focus on structure, and really what we want to do is achieving muscle texture, so that the feel is the same as in the animal.
Thanks, Nieves. I think that's an interesting transition into our next question, which is kind of about, from the CEO's perspective, in this space, what do you see as some of the key differentiators? I think that for some members of the audience, potentially for somebody who's coming at this from a bit more outside of an outside perspective, it's hard to tell what sets these companies apart, and are they all working on the same thing, or are they different things? Carson, I'll start with you since I didn't give you a chance to speak on the last one, but what do you see as some of the key components that are differentiating between different companies in the space and then your company?
Yeah, I think it's kind of been touched on by everybody to some degree already in the conversation, so I don't want to repeat, but I could speak for us personally. We're also interested in the scaffolding aspect, and that just comes from the background of my co-founder. Spending so much time and doing the Ph.D. in biomaterials and tissue engineering. We had a hammer, and that's the first thing we decided to use and progress our technology. In terms of, and it goes back to what Liz was saying, it seemed like in the beginning there were a lot of companies that said that they were going to do everything. And I don't think that's probably the right approach. And I think everybody's taking some time and readjusting and specializing from that aspect. So, for us, we're going to progress technology that we're capable of doing, and we're more than welcome to outsourcing some of that to other companies. So in terms of like what we're doing, we're focusing on fat right now because, obviously the cost is kind of the big issue right now for everybody. And I think one way of combating that is by thinking about these cell-based products that all of our companies are making as maybe just an ingredient, as opposed to the 100% the end goal. And I think you'll see a lot of that in the beginning of this industry until the price points come down, until these cell-based products can be 100% the product.
Thanks, Carson. You bring up a really interesting point. We talked a bit about structure, and I think that is a pretty incremental piece to the end consumption experience, mouthfeel, et cetera. But another component that has a really strong role in that is fat. Can you talk a bit more about how you see fat playing a role in the end, like in cell-based products, when the industry commercializes, and where is the technology now? Where does it need to go?
Did you see me?
That's for you.
Okay, sorry. I didn't catch that point. I guess I'll answer the question as I understood it. Are you fat relative to the cell base, or where fat products could potentially go in adjacent markets, or all the above?
I think all the above. If you see a lot of potential for both, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the only company thinking about this, and there's some good conversations to be had. But I definitely think that the hybrid system is something that everybody should take a look at. I think that's the way that we see it going. I think it has a place. I don't think it's the only thing that can be used, but I think animal fats has a place being combined with plant products. In my opinion, I think the biggest reason why I'm bullish on that statement is that I feel like it's a way to bridge into larger consumer bases. So maybe if it's 100% plant-based products, you might not get some of the people who were really, in the end, trying to connect to and bring people over to, which are the people who are you can tell them every fact and figure about the space and how, how detrimental factory farming is, but at the end of the day, they can't give up that taste. So that's who we're most interested in connecting to, because I feel like that's where the largest change is.
Thanks, Carson. And you mentioned too, this possibility of integrating cell-based fat into different plant-based products. I think that topic comes up a lot of times when we talk about barriers to scale for the industry. So I'd love to talk a bit about what each of you see as being the biggest barriers to scale. Liz, I can have you start with this. I know that you have a broad perspective.
Absolutely. So I think scale and cost reduction are part of the same, two sides of the same coin. So I think cost reduction of all of the inputs and capitalizing on economies of scale that simply has not been possible at bench and pilot scale production. That's an integral part as more and more of these startups move into their pilot scale facilities and look ahead towards demo scale and kind of charting out those cost of goods analyses. That's a very close consideration. But I think also from a bioprocess design perspective, that strikes me as the area where there's the most sort of true unknowns from an engineering perspective of, we know how to make small scale tissues for various regenerative medicine applications, but there's not a lot of proxies for how we produce large scale tissues at the scale of, millions of metric tons a year, like the meat industry. There are, of course, bridges to get us there, such as these hybrid products that we've touched on, where it may be sufficient to just have sort of micro scale structures, some cells on microcarriers or small pieces of tissue or cell aggregates that then are being recombined to make those larger scale products. If we're going that route, then there are pretty good proxies from the biopharma industry of what it looks like to grow animal cells in culture at tens of thousands of liters. So we can start from there, and then the industry will kind of build towards increasingly sophisticated product formats and increasingly higher levels of cell materials in those end products, as opposed to kind of layering in, say, scaffolding or overarching structure from other components such as plant-based proteins.
Thanks, Liz. Some really excellent, really interesting points there. I'll give a minute if any of the other panelists want to chime in on anything that Liz has said.
I'll take a swing at it. Liz said a lot, so I'll just cherry pick things that I like to talk about. Yeah, for us, we're going through the same types of things. So large scale, I guess, well, not large scale, but bigger pieces of tissue is something that we're very interested in understanding how we can push the boundaries, at least of the science that we know of, in terms of, how deep can we get cells into our scaffolds effectively and getting nutrients in and getting, some of the discreted material out in a sophisticated fashion where you're not decreasing proliferation. And, we've actually done some work to this date with that, but, for us, I'd be interested in anybody else that's done it and where they are. But, as of this point, we probably are in inch and a half of thickness of materials that we could get. And I would say just consider that probably like a cube of material where we're actually getting cells in and not only adhering, but then proliferating and being able to control that. But yeah, for large scale, that's the name of the game. I'm interested in the suspension model. Currently, right now, our cells aren't set up for suspension model, so we're doing all adhering to the scaffolds that we build. But I wonder, what path is going to lead to the highest densities, and where that leads us with in terms of bioreactor volumes that can legitimately give us commercial style quantities of product.
Yeah, and I think precisely the bioreactor vessel and the design of that piece of, critical piece is going to be critical. So of course we can do something in the lab to, achieve structure, but yeah, scaling up is going to be the job of the, bioengineers, and like really kind of design the wonder vessel for that. So yeah.
One thing I'll add here maybe is that, the biggest scaling challenge typically comes between bench and pilot. If your pilot facility truly recapitulates all steps of the process that you anticipate at demo scale or commercial scale. One thing that I've been sort of noticing across the sector with some degree of caution is, cases where a pilot facility maybe as a scaled down version of some components of the process, say the bioreactors, but doesn't necessarily include a scaled down version of, say, the harvesting process that they would anticipate actually using at full scale. So I think it's important when looking at pilot facilities to really be, clear-eyed about, is this truly a pilot facility? Does this really capture every part of the process and we're just gathering run data at these scales? Or is this really more of a pre-pilot? We've got some unit operations that are scaled down replicas of the full-scale process, but there may be, some additional manual handling steps or transfer steps between those unit operations that you wouldn't have in a full-scale facility. So I think keeping an eye towards that can give a sense of the risk that might be anticipated when moving to the next larger scale.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I think that's a really good point and makes me kind of wonder something, because in the current food space, obviously with products that are currently eaten, we have a number of really well-established, large-size food corporations who have a lot of experience and bandwidth at scaling up production of different products. And then in this space, we're seeing a lot of young, scrappy startups come and really do these impressive things. But just like you said, that scale-up transition from benchtop to pilot can be a real pain point. Does the panel see any ways that existing food corporates can play a role in helping these companies scale up this technology?
From my personal point of view, I think the pharmaceutical sector is a good role model, particularly vaccine productions, because that's where you handle cell culturing, cell therapy, and particularly against cancer. Because there's a lot of technology, particularly hardware, in particular bioreactor systems, that's perfect for stem cells. Yes, of course, it's maybe not the solution for have like a steak or structured meat, but for companies that head out for minced meat, I think it's a good way to learn.
Yeah, I would agree with exactly what Laura said in that regard, and but I do think that the food industry probably has its place as well, mainly probably downstream, obviously. Once the products are made, of course, that's not probably the largest hurdles that we're incurring with. So that's probably where that's not where the probably most productive dialogue is right now, but they do have a place. So I'm definitely pro working with large entities, because I've done both. I've been a part of small companies and large companies, and they both have their things that they do well, and they have things that they don't do well. So I think there's synergy bringing the two types of people together. So we as a company, talk to as many large scale companies as possible, trying to connect, because you never know where it leads.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really interesting points.
And yeah, we have partners in the in the meat industry who already seeing that they need to step up and like think ahead. So they actually reach out and want to be part of the cellular agriculture industry. So they're taking the first steps, and that's very encouraging as well, because they're ready to, start switching to this industry. So that's encouraging.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I just have to add one more thing. I totally support you. I think once the science is done, then the really hard work comes, the marketing. And that's why we also partnered up already with our potential customer. The earlier we can make the relationships and build them, I think maybe the better and tighter is when the days come for marketing.
Yeah. Laura, I think that's an excellent point, and a whole area that we haven't really gotten into yet today. And there's another side to it too, which is the investment side. There's a lot of activity happening there. So I'll try and squeeze both topics in. I'll start actually with the investment landscape. Liz, I'll start with you. If you have thoughts and views on what's really driving investment in cellular agriculture right now.
In the early days of this industry, we saw a lot of activity from impact investors, but really recently there's been investors coming to this sector simply because they see this as the the direction that meat production is going. I think we've seen in the last year and a half, especially, a lot of the inherent vulnerabilities of the conventional industrial meat production system. Whether that's from biosecurity threats like African swine fever virus, or some of the shutdowns and the backlogs that created in these long supply chains that we saw during the early days of COVID. As well as, of course, the climate implications. Countries increasingly talking about, things like carbon taxes or meat taxes or things like that could really upend the business model of the incumbent industry in a pretty substantial way. So I think increasingly we're seeing investors come around to this as simply being the future, simply being a risk mitigation strategy against a system that does exhibit a lot of these sort of basic economic vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think all really great thoughts. I know Laura, Nieves, and Carson, you're coming at it from a slightly different angle where, as CEOs of each of your companies, you've raised money. So I think you probably have a pretty unique perspective on the approach that you've seen from investors and how that experience has gone.
Well, actually, Liz said that perfectly. Like, you can sense the urgency building up, basically. And I would say since last year, COVID and, the closure of the plants and climate change. So they see that, we're getting there, the urgency is there. So you can sense it and feel it. And you can tell the impact investors have come a long way, but you can also see that the ones who just now realizing, we really have to put money in here because this is the future.
Yeah, from my perspective, being in Europe since early when we started 2018, they always say, "You're crazy, what you're doing." A lot of investors, but also German investors, are not so risk adverse. And this year it's starting, they see there's the urgent, but still they kind of shy. So that's why we looked outside Europe, and we feel they're way much open. They know it comes with or without them. So that's very interesting movement.
Yeah, I would say at this point for us, I would say overwhelmingly 80+% of the people that we have spoken to are impact investors. So they're coming at it from an underlying mission that they're trying to fit and connect our company to that. And it is quite amazing, though, because there is so much interest in the space. You see every day there's a new entity out there, trying to actively invest. And we speak to these people, on a daily or weekly basis. What I find interesting, though, is Obviously, when you have an influx of not only money and investors, but you also that money then draws in more companies and more startups, and it's interesting because a lot of the newer investors obviously are trying to understand what this industry is about, what the underlying technologies are, how is it going to come together. And, I'd say a majority of the people that we talk to like the idea of it, but aren't, they haven't figured out exactly how they fit or how each individual company fits into the space, and how are these companies differentiating themselves. So we fight that on a fairly frequent basis, and I'd say the other two in the squares here would say the same.
It looks like it based on the reactions. I think, yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. It's about that. I understand most of the investors, they do not have like this scientific background, and yes, and we have the same issue, like explaining, but we also are offering, hey, you want to use a technical consultant, because there are people out there, and they really think that's something valuable they want to take, and it's something makes them feel better, so they don't have to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Out of curiosity, I know, Liz, you mentioned that specifically COVID has sort of underlined some vulnerabilities in the current supply chain. Have the three of you CEOs noticed a difference in investor responses pre or post COVID? Have you seen more or less hesitation around the whole industry?
For our company, yes, because we start funding, or we tried to start funding before COVID, and we had really hard times. And with COVID, it just got really smooth, and we had like more chance, more leads. So for us, actually, it was the best time to start.
One silver lining. Thanks, Laura. And I say post-COVID, I obviously don't mean that it's over.
Yeah, well, we incorporated exactly when COVID started, so it happened that way, and so I cannot very much speak about it. So
I would just comment that I think we probably, because of this, obviously it's accelerated the virtual space and it's got everybody on board. So I would say that it's helped in terms of the number of volume of people that we get to speak to on a weekly basis, virtually face to face. But in terms pre or post, there's not been too much of a difference. I also wonder too, obviously with COVID on everybody's mind, to Liz's point, talking about the biosecurity aspect of where this technology could push us into by eliminating some of these models with how we raise animals and how potential things could come about by eliminating that altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Carson. So the last question I'll ask, and then we'll move into audience questions, is on the consumer side. So we've spoken a bit about watching investors warm up to this industry and start to understand this is likely the next step for meat. From a consumer perspective, it's very early, but I'm wondering your views on what will need to happen to approach consumers and to kind of have this something that's accepted, and what's the response that you're seeing now, if any, in discussions around it?
My experience is, because I have also this traditional meat business, there are, I call them the generation Greta Thunberg. I mean, my feeling is it's like more the younger people, they're very open to that. For them, it's logical. And those people are entering now, their careers, founding families, so they get used to it. But then you have this other side, they say, no way. And personally, I think there's also no chance to convince those people. So let's focus on the people that wants it. And by the years, we can build like a new generation that get used to it. I know maybe it's silly comparison, but it's the same with a smartphone. When I first got a smartphone, I didn't understand why I should use it, but I used it once and then it's like, oh, that's good. I'm never going to give it away. So I think it's the same with clean meat. And if you have the same taste, the same structure, but even a better price, or at least the same price, people don't feel that they want to miss it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then
Yeah,
I
I'll
would
say
just say, oh, go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to comment on some of the consumer studies that we've seen over the last few years. I continue to be very pleasantly surprised at how many people are open to trying these products. A few years ago, there was a lot of chatter around the so-called ick factor. Would this just be a non-starter for consumers? It feels too much like technology in their food, etc. But in study after study that we've seen conducted in different regions of the world, framing the question slightly differently, you're getting consistently, 30, 40, 60% of people saying, yes, I'd be willing to try this. And even in some studies, a pretty sizable fraction of the respondents indicating that they would actually pay more for the product because they value those external benefits to environment, to animal welfare, etc. Of course, there's always the caveat that consumer studies based on just what people are saying they would do can often look very different than real actual consumer behavior. So I think we should take all of these studies with a grain of salt. But I think consumers are interested in taste, they're interested in price, they're also interested in things like food safety, and there's a number of advantages that this transparent, clean, safe production environment can offer, just from a personal safety perspective, much less from the public health safety perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, with the price, I have like an issue because I see it in farming. Farmers try many years to get better prices, and we have like loads of consumer studies here in Europe and especially in Germany. They always say, yeah, we pay a higher price, but when they go to the supermarket, they don't. So I think people don't want to pay for food a lot of money because they want to buy some other stuff. They're interested in materials, going traveling. So personally, I think that's why it's important to be competitive in some ways.
I would say that I do think that, well, I think there's this McKinsey study that came out that's saying that, there are people who really pay like 2.2 more for grass-fed meat versus, the non-grass-fed. And that, I think that's a key, point of information, because the new generations, I think, paying more for food when, it's, you have like a reason for it, like, okay, it's grass-fed, that means, okay, they're not fed like, grains and stuff. So I think there's people willing to do it. However, it's going to be critical to really approach, entry to market from all the different companies, different products, also adding cell-based meat to products like, like the fats, or, little stripes of bacon in some, frozen products or things like that, like slowly getting into all the, shelves of the grocery store, basically. And that approach, I think it's good that we're all, having different products, different approaches, because that's gonna, at one point is gonna become evident that people are gonna see it everywhere, and then hopefully and try it and become things.
Yeah, I would just say there's multiple things that each of you said that got my mind running. One, Laura was talking about the younger generations. I think it is fairly clear that I'd say the younger generations are more open to trying these types of technologies. And then I also think about, I at the point now, at least, US, where 50% of the population is millennial or younger. And there's, in the next couple decades, there's a very large wealth transfer to these younger generations as these older generations die out, unfortunately. So, I mean, money speaks. And if the younger generations are truly wanting to eat these types of products, I think it will show. And then, in terms of, I do think that I said earlier about it, probably we'll start seeing cell-based as ingredients as opposed to full products. So I think you'll get a little bit of that to help you out. If it's not the full thing, but it's got aspects in it, I think that will slowly bring people consciously that, it's an okay thing to eat. And then I also wonder about where we're going from labeling and going back to, it seems like there's so many innovations that's happening in this field. It seems like there's going to be a lot of types of labeling that's going to come out. And I wonder if we'll start to see food being labeled with sustainable labels. And I think that's an important thing that's growing, especially with everybody, but generally the younger population as well.
Also, I would like to add another aspect of, the advantages of using cellular agriculture to produce meat is that, many companies are choosing to do animals. They're actually not many animals to make it that convert. Oh, sorry, I'm just going like, what I mean is like they're animals that we cannot eat. They're not in the store right now because of, they're in very rare. And then maybe some people are interested in trying that through cellular agriculture. So I like the approach of companies like Bao and others who, are looking into these rare animals, because there's no harm on producing that meat as opposed to, through the traditional system. And that might also bring some consumers in, attract them, so.
Absolutely. I think all really excellent points, and actually very optimistic for consumer adoption and this, like we've spoken about, really becoming the next wave of meat. And Liz, I think the advantages that you highlighted for consumers as far as the health of the product, that's a really important component too. A lot of times we spend a lot of time speaking about the environmental impacts, and of course that's huge and does actually have a major implication for consumers. But then there's that really direct implication, which is this really is clean meat. It's not just called that for an environmental reason, it's called that because of what's in the meat as well. So something that is nice to highlight and bring into the conversation. We are nearly approaching the end. So I want to thank everyone for your really excellent points and insights today. It's been a real pleasure learning from you and hearing about your views. We have just a few minutes left, so I'll hand it over to the panel. If there's one last thing that you'd like to just kind of leave, if somebody walks away from this who joined not knowing that much about this space, what's one thing that you would want them to walk away knowing?
I would be more pragmatic and say, if you have questions, there's no time, just contact us. So, and then we probably find a slot that we have like a personal meeting. So.
Yeah, I think I would emphasize that there are so many career opportunities in this space. That's one of the biggest bottlenecks we hear over and over from startups is particularly sourcing technical talent. But as these companies mature, they'll need marketing teams, they need regulatory teams, they need straight up business development teams. This is no longer a niche field. This really is the future wave of innovation. And so I encourage folks from all different backgrounds to really think about how they can plug into what's happening in this sector. And at our website, we have a number of resources for folks looking for those career inroads, as well as just to learn more about the space at gfi.org.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, I don't think I can say it better than that. Really, at the end of the day, if you came into it not knowing much about it, I hope that you leave knowing that it is a field that is growing, and it's interesting. You know, there are a lot of technologies out there that seem to be moving very slow, and then all of a sudden it seems like there's an exponential move, and then boom, it's everywhere. So at least with the people who are on the conversation today, they won't be surprised when it comes, because it will.
Good point. Thanks, Carson. Thank you, everyone, so much. Like I said, it's been really a pleasure, and you'll see this in the chat, but this is being recorded, so we'll share this with attendees. Appreciate you all joining and your interest in the space, and panelists, your time and your insights. It's been great.